let me tell you a little bit about Lara Milligan, and then we'll get started. Lara Milligan is the Natural Resources Agent for the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, Extension Pinellas County. Her work focuses on wildlife, water, and general environmental education, working with all ages. Lara earned her bachelor's degree in natural resource conservation and a master's of forest resources and conservation from the University of Florida. During her master's, Lara also received a certificate in environmental education and communication. And shortly after starting her extension career, she completed the Natural Resources Leadership Institute. And now, without further ado, let me turn over the floor to Lara. Here you go.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joan. And thank you all for tuning in on this Tuesday morning to educate yourselves about, I don't know that I can really call it a relatively new species in Pinellas County anymore. When I first started, that's how I started my presentation, but I think they might just be a resident species now. So today we are going to talk about and learn all about the coyote. So hopefully you're in the right spot, and if not, then buckle your seatbelt because here we go. So in today's presentation, I'm going to talk about the history of the coyote because, as I alluded to just before, they weren't always here in Pinellas County. We'll cover a little bit of their biology and kind of how that is relevant to you, address some concerns as it relates to conflicts with coyotes, which is usually what I get most of my phone calls and emails about. And then, of course, an extension, our job is to teach everyone how to coexist with coyotes. And hopefully after this, you'll have a new appreciation for this species. All right, so we are going to jump right into the history of coyotes. So as I mentioned, they weren't always here in Pinellas County or even in the state of Florida. So this map here on your screen, the darker the orange is the more historical the range is how you can look at that. So they kind of originated in central western portion of the United States. And then as they expanded their range, they started to expand further west into the north. And then more recently, they started to expand kind of to the northeast. And then the most recent migration was, or range expansion, I should say, is further south and all the way down into Florida. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So you might be wondering, like, okay, well, like how or why did that happen? So there's several factors that come into play with that. So first is the eradication of wolves. So wolves were seen as a major threat to agricultural producers and ranchers out west, where the where coyotes existed, and now kind of where wolves existed, and now where coyotes have kind of filled that niche, because there were actually government programs to pay people to kill off wolves so that agricultural producers could thrive and survive, because the wolves were destroying, like killing cattle or destroying crops. And so between that and some other factors I'm going to talk about, that had decreased competition for the coyotes. And so that allowed them to kind of fill that niche that the wolves were filling before. And then not only as a result of agricultural production, so we were clearing forested lands for that, but also for development and a variety of other factors. We kind of went from these forested landscapes to more what we see on the right-hand side of the screen. When it comes to coyotes, they actually have a preference for these more wide open landscapes. So I'm going to play a little like psychic here. I'd be willing to bet that if you have seen a coyote in Pinellas County, it was most likely in a very open area like a golf course or a cemetery or a parking lot area or like a sports field or something like that. So feel free to type in the chat if that is true, and I'll ask you guys another question about that later. So furthermore, to add to this ability to expand their range, they are pretty much generalists in all aspects. So they don't have specific food or habitat requirements. Although they prefer those open landscapes, they can really adapt to just about living anywhere, and they eat pretty much anything. So that definitely aids in their ability to expand their range. And then they also have a relatively large litter size for a larger mammal. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the biology. Okay, so Joan mentioned that we're going to have a little interaction because I know it's hard to stay focused on Zoom webinars. So you can type your answer in the chat. This is a true or false question. Coyotes have been documented in every county in Florida. And bonus points if you know how many counties there are in Florida. How about that? Okay, I see mostly true question mark. I'll give everybody a second. So again, you can click on, there should be a little chat icon on the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, it should give you the ability to type in a response. Ooh, and Judy wins for 67 counties in Florida. Good job, Judy. All right, see, you guys don't even, you guys can like leave the webinar now because you already know everything about coyotes. So the answer is true. Coyotes have been documented now in every single county in Florida. And they're all over the United States. So if you're looking to escape coyotes, you'll have to go somewhere outside of the United States. So this is just showing there's been a variety of different studies looking at coyotes to show that they now have been documented in every single county. So I'm curious, I don't think you guys have a raise hand feature. So you can either type in the chat. Oh, you do. Okay, I see people doing that. So click on the raise hand feature on your screen if you guys have seen a coyote in Florida. It can be anywhere in Florida, not necessarily Pinellas County. And then I'll pay attention to the chat too. All right, so we've got 18 participants so far that have raised their hand and several people chiming in the chat. So let's see, there's 50 people tuned in right now, so a little less than half. And I'd be willing to say if you have not, it's only a matter of time before you do. And I would say that you're not alone. The Animal Services in Pinellas County used to have this really cool interactive map where you could report sightings of coyotes. They weren't verified or anything, but if you went on this map, I mean, you couldn't even see Pinellas County. It was just covered in sightings of coyotes. So it's really pretty cool if you think about it. We are the most densely populated county in the state, and this large mammal is able to thrive and survive here. All right, so switching gears now to talk a little bit about their biology. So I alluded before, they're pretty much generalists when it comes to their diet. They are considered omnivores, eating both plant and animal material. And really, if you look at the breakdown of their stomach contents and what they're eating based on studies, it's a pretty good mix of all of these things. Small mammals making up the majority of it, things like squirrels and rabbits, but they'll also eat fruit. Insects actually make up a decent portion of their diet. If they're hungry enough and they come across a dead animal, they will even consume that. And then of course, in urban areas, they have adapted to feed off of pet food that's left out or taking advantage of garbage that is also left outside. So when we are talking about size of coyotes, people again often think about wolves and coyotes in this same mindset. And there are similarities, but there's also a lot of differences, one of which is their overall size. So males on average, which are slightly larger than females, about 25 pounds. So I don't know if that gives you any perspective, but in terms of their height off the ground, they're only about 20 to 22 inches at their shoulder height on average. So that's usually about like around where your knee is, again, depending on how tall you are. So they aren't super massive. Again, this can vary. This is an average. But just to, again, give you a little bit of perspective. And then they reach full size in less than 2 years. And that'll make more sense when I talk about their lifespan as well. And this picture to the right is actually from a retired staff member of the county communications, Lou Claudio, and this is right in Clearwater in his backyard. He took this picture, which I think is super awesome. So in terms of when coyotes are most active, they are considered, you might have heard of diurnal or nocturnal. So they are coyotes are considered what we call crepuscular, which means that they're most active at dawn and dusk. So right as the sun's coming up and right as the sun's going down. Now, what that doesn't mean is if you see them out and about other times of the day that they have rabies or something's wrong with them. Again, they are very, very smart and have adapted, and they learn to work around like, oh, okay, these people have gone to work, so now I'm going to go raid their garbage can, or, you know, anyway, they have adapted to urban settings. So again, most active during those times, but not the end all be all. And then they're blessed with lots of things that enable them to be really amazing survivors. Usually you don't get all of your senses that are awesome, but coyotes do. So they have really, really good eyesight, really, really good hearing, and really, really good sense of smell. So that enables them to hunt and survive really well. And then in terms of how they hunt, so most often they'll just be in their mating pairs. Sometimes they'll be in smaller family groups, especially in a couple months, and we'll talk about that again when I get into a little bit more about their biology. Less often they'll be in these either alone or kind of the large packs that we think about with wolves. It's not to say that that's not the case, but it tends to be these kind of smaller family groups or in their mating pairs. So in terms of coyotes, they breed once a year, mating now, and or about to have their pups. So they have a 2-month gestation period. Usually their pups will be born between April and May. And as I mentioned before, their litter size is pretty large. So on average, they will have 6 pups, which is a lot in the wild. I've seen anywhere between 12 and 13 documented in the research for the most number of pups. So again, that's an average of 6. What's really unique in the mammal world is that both the male and the female help to raise the young for 9 months before the young go off on their own, or again, they'll stay with their little family unit. Then the coyotes are sexually mature already at age 1. So full grown at age 2, sexually mature at age 1, average of 6 pups. You can do the math. And again, we'll get into that more too. But first, another poll question for you. So I've talked about different years when things happen, but how long do you think that coyotes live on average in the wild? So these are your options, so you can type. I should have probably put A, B, C, or D, but I trust you guys are able to type out these numbers. All right. I see all different answers coming in. I think we've had everything. Price, oh, yeah, it's all over the place. Oh man, we might need a drum roll for this one. Okay, here we go. It is 5 to 6 years is the average lifespan of the coyote. So again, thinking back to some of the aspects of their biology I've talked about, things kind of need to happen quickly because they don't live that long. So coyotes have something that's, I think, is really, really awesome in terms of their biology. They do something that's called density-dependent reproductive response. And this was kind of discovered as eradication and control efforts were occurring on coyotes where they were a nuisance or a problem, or just where people didn't want coyotes to be. There were these targeted efforts to remove the coyotes, trap and kill, or just relocate. And what they found is it was not effective. Basically, the populations would rebound very, very quickly. Other coyotes would move in, or this density-dependent reproductive response, which is as coyotes were removed from a particular area, the remaining coyotes then had access to more resources, and it triggers this biological response that the females would then have more pups because they, there's more resources available to support them. And so it was just, they'd remove some, but then the number of pups, so like the average number instead of 6 would probably be more in that scenario. And so that's why you don't really see a lot of efforts to remove or eradicate coyotes in a particular area because they've adapted to defeat us. So, and that is why, and I think that's really, really awesome. Now, in terms of threats, so I mentioned hunting and trapping. Coyotes are not protected in any way. So again, just depending where you live in the state and what the rules are, there is hunting and trapping that's permitted. Sometimes you do need to get permission and things like that. I'm not going to get into those details. Car strikes, which unfortunately is one of the #1 killers of most wildlife species. And then in certain areas, not so much here in Florida, predation by larger carnivores. And then I mentioned before, their lifespan is 5 to 6 years. So you may or may not have ever thought about where coyotes raise their pups. And so they do that in dens, which can be a variety of places. The ones listed here are natural, but they can also take advantage of places like underneath people's porch, or if you have a raised house underneath the house. So again, they're very adaptable. So they can either just like dense thickets of palmetto, like you see in this image here. Trees tend, as they age, they kind of hollow out from the middle. That's the oldest part of the tree, so they'll take advantage of hollow logs. Large brush piles as well provide really good shelter. And they're also known to take advantage of existing burrows of things like armadillos or gopher tortoises and dig and expand those to be suitable for them. Oops. And I did also want to mention, so the dens are only used while they're raising their pups, and it's usually only for a couple months, just again to kind of keep them safe and protected while they get big enough and kind of learn how to hunt on their own. So they're not used year round. Okay, and another super cool thing I thought when I was first kind of learning all about coyotes when I started my job in Extension is this idea of their home range. So if you're not familiar with home range, it's basically the space or area an animal needs to find everything it needs to survive: food, water, cover, shelter. The research that has been done has shown that the home range of coyotes in a natural area, so think Brooker Creek Preserve or Weeden Island Preserve, is 15 square miles, compared to in an urban setting, it's only 3 square miles, which I don't know. I think, you know, if you were to ask me that maybe at the very beginning, I'd be like, oh, well, it's got to be smaller in a natural area. There's everything they need right there. But when you think about how, again, kind of generalized this species is in terms of their food and habitat requirements, that if in an urban setting, they could live under your front porch, drink out of your pet food dish, and get their food out of your garbage can. They don't have to go far to find what they need. Whereas in a natural setting, you know, in say the dry season, they might have to travel further to find access to what, excuse me, to water, which I think that was a clue that I need some. So very, very cool. And then there's not a whole lot of research on coyotes in Florida. There's just not a ton of funding out there. But the limited research that we do have, they did some radio collar studies where they put tracking collars on certain coyotes to see where they go, how far they travel. This one particular one on the image on your left was a juvenile male, and he traveled about 40 miles. So again, we don't know a ton, like, is this normal? Was this a one-off thing? Why are they moving? Sadly, these are all unknown, but we know that they can travel far. Okay, time for some more interaction. We're gonna play a little highlights magazine. So get your chat box open and ready. So on the left, we have some coyote tracks. On the right, we have bobcat tracks. I know they're kind of faded, but I really, or, you know, a little hard to see. These are real tracks we took right at Brooker Creek Preserve. So what are some differences that you see between the tracks on the left, the coyote, and the tracks on the right for the bobcat? Get the chat open. Okay, so toenails, weight on the foot pad, wider paw toes, toe pad shape. You guys are good. Slimmer coyote. I'm telling you, you guys could give this presentation. Ah, cute little kitten toes. Yeah, so you guys mentioned already all the things that I wanted to touch on. So I think I have it on the next slide. It'll be a little easier to see. Oh, nope. Well, I'll show you that next slide too. But on the left, so you guys mentioned the claw marks, the toes. So on the coyote tracks on the left, you can see there's claw marks here that are absent on the bobcat tracks on the right. And if you think about, if any of you guys have domestic dogs or domestic cats, dogs do not have the ability to retract their claws like cats do. So when they're walking, they're going to leave claw marks. Cats, on the other hand, when they're walking, their claws are retracted, and so there won't be claw marks in their tracks. So that's one thing you can look for. And then in general, they have a very narrow track, the coyotes do. So if you were to trace an outline, it'd be more like egg-shaped or oval-shaped, compared to the outline of a bobcat track is going to be much more circular. So good job. And then this is just showing some differences between a coyote track and a domestic dog track. Again, the key is really going to be that the coyote track is very narrow, so it's longer than it is wide. Again, there's so many breeds of dogs, so that's definitely not like an end-all be-all. That's kind of a general statement that may or may not be obvious. Domestic dogs tend to be a lot more spread out. If you do have access to a set of tracks where you can see like a line where they've been walking, coyotes are on a mission. Their tracks are going to be very straight. And if you think about domestic dogs, they're kind of like, yeah, let me go over here, let me go over here. So their track or path is kind of going to be all over the place. So that's another thing you could look for. And then for those of you that might have never seen a coyote, we can look for evidence of coyotes in addition to their tracks. Something that's pretty distinctive is their SCAT. Now, like pretty much any SCAT from any animal, especially one with a varied diet, the SCAT's going to vary significantly depending on what they're eating and what food sources are available. But on average, and I don't know whose job it was to go out and measure coyote SCAT, but if you're interested in a job, you can be a scatologist, and I fully support you because I will use your data and your research. But the average length is 4 inches long. So if you want to whip out your measuring tape and measure some SCAT, have at it. And then it typically will contain hair of their prey. So remember, small mammals make up a good portion of their diet, and that hair is not really digestible. So that will come out in their SCAT, which you can see here. The only other SCAT, I mean, aside from domestic dog, that you might confuse this with would be bobcat SCAT. But bobcat SCAT is very segmented. For those of you that have domestic cats, you might be familiar as you're cleaning out the litter bowl, but it's kind of like these little beads strung together. So that's, sometimes it's a lot more obvious than others, but that might be the only other, in terms of wild species, that you would confuse it with. Okay, let me see where I'm at with time. Doing great. Okay, coyote conflicts. So we'll start off with another true/false question. So get your chat box open. So true or false, coyotes cannot transmit diseases to humans, pets, or livestock. I see a mix of answers coming in, some true, some false. Okay, right? They always say you got a 50-50 chance on true or false. So this is false. And we'll talk about that next. So coyotes can carry dozens of different diseases. Lots are documented. And if you think about it, for those of you that have domestic dogs, right, we bring them to the vet to get treated for a lot of the things that we see here on the screen. These parasites, whether it's lice, ticks, heartworm, whipworm, lungworm, insert name worm. And we can treat domestic dogs for that. Coyotes are obviously not getting any form of treatment, so they are prone to get and carry all of these things which can be transmitted to our pets. another reason it's important to get your pets treated for these things. So that is the case. And I will mention that, again, coyotes are often associated with rabies. I think that really goes for a lot of wildlife species. There's just a big fear of rabid wildlife species. In terms of coyotes, it, of course, it exists in the population, but it is very, very, very rare. Raccoons are by far the #1 carrier of rabies. Again, I don't want to scare you with raccoons either, but as long as we are being safe and learn to coexist with these species, it should definitely not be a cause for concern. Now, this next point may either bring you relief or increase your fear. So, but stick with me because hopefully I'll make it better either way. So in general, coyotes pose a much greater risk to pets than they do to people. We're pretty big. Pets, especially domestic dogs, and this time of year when they're being very territorial, they're breeding, they might be raising young, you know, they might see something like a domestic dog as a threat. And or for smaller pets like cats or smaller dogs as a potential prey item. The very good news is it's a super easy problem to fix. So if you have cats, this is my favorite part of the presentation because like I can never do anything where it's 100% guarantee, but I can 100% guarantee that your cat will not die from being eaten by a coyote if they're kept indoors 100% of the time. So yay for that. And then in terms of walking your dog, obviously dogs need to be let out to go to the bathroom and run around and get exercise and all the things. So it just requires a little bit closer attention if you know coyotes are in the area. And we recommend if you are walking your dog, especially those on the smaller dogs, to not have those leashes that extend out really, really far. We recommend the kind of strict 6-foot leash to keep your pets close to you, because if they do encounter a coyote and their instinct is probably going to be to run, which is going to trigger the coyote's instinct to chase. And they have all that leeway on some of those longer leashes. So this just helps to keep them closer to you. And again, this statement really goes for all wildlife species, but typically if a particular species becomes what we would classify as a nuisance, it's a result of us doing something to them to encourage them to come closer to us. And usually we call that being habituated. And usually that's associated with being fed. So we definitely recommend not to feed coyotes or really any wildlife species. There is plenty of natural food out there, despite what people might think. And as I mentioned, coyotes are very, very adaptable. So we definitely do not need to be feeding them and certainly not by hand. That is only going to pose risks for not only you, but the people around you. And then this statistic, I think, always really puts it into perspective in terms of documented bites per year. These are from 2 different sources because obviously these would not be tracked in the same database, but the number of coyote bites on average per year is 3.5 that have been documented compared to the things that we live with and spend money on. You know, it's close to 5 million bites per year. So I think that just kind of puts it into perspective a little bit. We definitely don't need to be afraid that a coyote is going to come out and attack us or bite us. I mean, certainly there's cases, again, where there might be a rabid coyote or one that has been continually fed and might reach that point of getting too close to where they would bite, but there is things that we can do about that, and I'll talk about that next. All right, so coexisting. I already mentioned before, we should never feed coyotes or really any wild animal. If you can prevent access to your garbage and pet food, just bringing your pet food in at night, or at least during those key times, remember when they're active, most active, that word crepuscular, at dawn and dusk. If you're able to just bring your garbage can out like first thing in the morning instead of leaving it out all night, that's certainly an easy way to prevent them from getting access to it. Again, keeping your cat indoors, watching especially the smaller dogs. Now, if you get approached by a coyote don't run. We encourage people to stand their ground, and our goal is going to be to instill fear back in the coyote. So you basically, I always say, like, act like a crazy person, but you want to make yourself seem really, really big, wave your arms, yell towards the coyote, and you want to act aggressively towards the coyote. We're not trying to harm the coyote, we're just trying to scare it to be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be getting close to these things that look like something big and scary. And definitely if you guys have pets with you when this happens, you want to pick them up, especially the smaller pets, and children as well. Same idea with the kind of running, chasing instinct. Some people might think it's cool that a coyote is taking advantage of their crawl space underneath their porch or shed. So if that's the case, you can ignore this statement. But if you're like, I don't want a coyote making a den anywhere near me, then consider closing off those crawl spaces underneath your house or porch or shed. And make sure that you teach your kids what to do if they are approached or see a coyote. Again, their instinct is for sure going to be to run. So just teaching them, again, what to do is really, really beneficial for everybody involved. And then I'm one person. There's a million people close to in Pinellas County. And so the only way I can do my job is by encouraging you to take what you learned today and to talk to other people about it and share and spread your new knowledge. And Joan, I don't know if you have the links that I sent out, but I know she's going to include them in the follow-up email. There's some additional online resources that if you want to like go back and reference, and of course this is going to be recorded, like Joan mentioned, for you to go back and reference again later on. Let's see. Oh, nope. Last part about, okay, there's something officially called coyote hazing. I'm not a huge fan of the term hazing, but that's what they call it. So these are some other things you can keep in mind in terms of coexisting with coyotes. If you know they're in the area and you have a pet or a small child, you can consider just keeping bear spray on you if that brings you comfort. And then of course, if you need to use it, you have it. If you have a hose or a water gun and they're approaching, again, we're going to spray it. It's not going to harm the coyote. It's just water. So again, it's just all of this is to instill fear in the coyotes. Anything that makes a loud noise. So if you have an air horn, you probably don't want to be that neighbor, but if necessary, a loud whistle. This down here, a coyote shaker. This could be a fun activity to do with the kids or grandkids. You can put pebbles or coins inside an aluminum can, and that is surprisingly loud. Throwing objects toward the coyote, not with the intent to hit the coyote. Our objective again is never to harm the coyote. Having an injured coyote is worse than having one that's probably approaching you. So again, we're throwing objects towards it just to scare it away. If you have a walking stick or golf club, again, that's just going to make you look even larger and, you know, kind of that aggressive action. This one, again, this is just documented. Anywhere you look up coyote hazing, they reference use of a paintball gun. And again, I want to stress this is not to hit the coyote, but to shoot at or toward, not at, to shoot in the direction of the coyote to scare them off. So anyway, take this for what it is. The goal, again, is not to harm the coyote in any way, but to instill fear. So if you do have a nuisance coyote, again, there's not going to be major eradication efforts around coyotes because they're able to adapt to that. But through the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, they have a site where they list all licensed wildlife trappers. The Florida Fish and Wildlife themselves don't have the staff to come out and take care of coyotes, but they will provide this list of trappers that you can scroll through. They mention which species that they target, and you can call. It would be out of your pocket to pay the wildlife trapper to take care of that one particular nuisance coyote. So certainly if there's one that's getting way too close consistently, then that is something that you would probably want to address. And so let's see where I'm at with time. All right, awesome. We have plenty of time for questions. So again, I want to thank you guys for taking time out of your Tuesday morning to learn about coyotes with me. We are, Joan mentioned before, we're on Facebook, whether you're following Brooker Creek Preserve or Wheaton Island Preserve or Pinellas County Extension. We're all over the place, and YouTube is the place to go to find on-demand options for continued learning. So Joan, I will hand it back over to you for some Q&A.
Lara, thank you so much. What an important bunch of information and really good resources. Speaking of resources, I did include the links that Lara just mentioned. Some super good fact sheets and other resources for you will be coming in the follow-up email from Zoom. So you can check those out after the program. You're going to be getting a follow-up email tomorrow. And then the program is recorded. So once we get it all pretty and all of that, we'll post it up on our YouTube channel, which I've also provided the link for. So you can jump on that anytime you want and check out some of our other videos in the meantime. Wow, Lara, what a great presentation. And we've got a great and engaged audience too, with tons of questions for you. So are you ready?
I don't know. I'm nervous, but I'm ready. I'm excited that there is lots of questions.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So in no particular order, let's start off with, so at the beginning of the presentation, you were talking about kind of where common areas were that people had cited coyotes in the past. And Rebecca offered that she had heard of many sightings in alleys and urban areas of St. Pete, which she says are not very wide open. And she wanted to know if you knew why that was.
So I don't know scientifically, there's no specific research on that, but my guess would be, again, they tend to take advantage of any open trails. So like at Brooker Creek Preserve, we have trail cameras set up, and we've set them up like kind of off trail, but anytime we set the trail camera up on an existing trail, that's when we get coyotes. So they're just going to take the path of least resistance. So they're likely just taking advantage of that free access to go from point A to point B.
Okay, great answer. Bill, in a similar vein, is wondering if you can post the site that you were talking about that showed the sightings that people entered in. Is that something still existing?
So yeah, I should have done that right before this, but the last time I checked with Animal Services, that site is no longer active. If it is and I find it, I'll send it to you, Joan, to push out in the follow-up email. Perfect. But if you just do a search for like Pinellas County Animal Services coyotes, it would be right there if you find it. But I will definitely make a note to double check that.
Cool. Appreciate that. And then there were a couple of questions about the lineage of coyotes. One from Katie: how closely related to dogs are coyotes?
Yeah, so we always get the questions about, are they, coy wolves, are they coy dogs? And, they're all in the same family. And fortunately or unfortunately, as I alluded to before, in terms of funding for research, there isn't a ton out there. There was one a couple years ago to see what do we have here in Florida. And unfortunately that kind of fell through. So I was really excited to get that research, and then it just didn't happen. But so they're related, I guess I can at least say that. And then there are some in terms of genetics and DNA. It depends on the actual individual. From the studies I've seen, some will have, aspects of wolf in them. And then again, they're all related to dogs in some form or fashion, depending where you go in the taxonomy. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
yeah, no, that's very helpful. And actually we had a couple of other related questions we might as well knock off along the same lines. So and obviously we need more research, but Bill was wondering, did they evolve from wolves, or are they an individual species?
Yeah, great question. So they're an individual species. So I can definitely answer that.
Cool. And then on the relationship again, there are a couple things. Laura and Judy were wondering, can coyotes and dogs mate and produce young?
Yes, that's a good question. So yes, they can. It's very, very rare that everything would time up and line up for that to occur. And if and when it does occur, the offspring will then not be able to successfully reproduce. So I don't think it's nothing I would be concerned about, but it is possible.
Okay. And then Judy was wondering, do coyotes mate for life?
That's a great question. So yes, they do mate for life, which again is very unique in the coyote world. And I think I even saw, it might have just been in the chat when I was scrolling through, but oh my gosh, and now I'm gonna blank on the thing. Mate for life. Oh, they were asking about reusing dens, so kind of along the same line. And that again varies. They will reuse the den as long as nothing has kind of scared them off from that particular area, or they might, for whatever reason, decide to move. So it's not, they will not for sure reuse the den year after year.
That's great. We actually had that as a question, so thank you for covering that. Let's see. Mark was wondering, no bounty on coyotes?
Oh, I guess it depends who you ask, but no, there's no official like government bounty or anything for coyotes right now. If you wanted to get in that business, you can definitely become a licensed wildlife trapper, and people will pay folks to remove not only coyotes, but a variety of other nuisance species.
So Mark was wondering, do coyotes favor any type of agricultural or vegetable plant types?
That's a good question. I have not seen any research to suggest like particular species. I do know watermelon, I know that sounds crazy, is one that they will go after. I'm not to say that that's preferred over any. Again, they're pretty generalist, so they'll take advantage really of whatever is available to them. But I know there's been documentation through photos of that.
Excellent. Okay, let's see. Now, we had a couple of questions about the fur color, because they have such a wonderful diversity of fur. So Mark was wondering, is there any one thing that accounts for darker color of fur? And in addition, Judy was wondering if a black coyote was rare.
All good questions. So again, that was kind of getting at the research that I was hoping was gonna happen that didn't, because they were curious as to what if it was genetics that was why we were seeing so much variation in color. Because in Florida in particular, and kind of the southern range of coyotes, we're really the only ones that have these really dark coyotes. I think there was one picture that I showed on a Clearwater golf course of a really dark coyote. I wouldn't say they're rare, but I wouldn't say they're like super common, the dark ones. It just really varies, especially in Florida. And unfortunately, we just don't have the research to know like what the cause for that is, other than just it varies a lot. And that's kind of unique to us in this part of the United States.
So back on to the question about the favorite types of veggies or plants or anything like that. James offered a comment about George Heinrich, who is a local field biologist who apparently did a study that showed that coyotes love queen palm fruit, and that they're a major vector of that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yes, that is another thing I can definitely send to you, Joan, to share, because that is local research, and somewhat unfortunate because they're helping to spread a non-native species. So I won't get into details on that, but yeah, again, they'll kind of take advantage of whatever is in fruit and in the area. And that is one thing that you can definitely identify in their SCAT when that is happening.
Perfect. All right, another question. Kathy was wondering, and this is about the, how to repel coyotes if you see them area. And she was wondering, what is a coyote shaker that you were talking about?
Yeah, so good question. That's just really any device that you make that you can shake. And specifically, I was referencing like an aluminum soda can. You can just pop the top, empty the contents, and then fill it with either small coins or beads or marbles or rocks, and shake it. And that just produces a loud noise. So it's kind of a homemade noise maker.
Okay, perfect. Got a couple of questions now. One from Carol, wondering, do coyotes hunt each other too, like some animals do?
That's another great question. And I have not seen anything that alludes to them eating their own species. That being said, I will say, in terms of their diet, and another kind of unique feature of the coyotes that we have in this part of the United States, kind of the southeastern part, is that our coyotes eat more deer than coyotes out west, particularly the fawns. But I'd say that's like probably the largest in terms of size animal that they will eat. So not themselves, but that's another large mammal.
Wow, that's really interesting. Let's see, on the diet theme as well, Laura is wondering, have they about the interaction of coyotes with our invasive species? Have they been impacted by or are predators for our invasive species?
That's a great question. I'm not aware of any invasive species that are impacting their populations. I think what James alluded to before is that they can definitely, because they do eat fruit and seeds of certain species, that they could definitely be helping to spread invasive plant species. And in terms of them, I'm trying to think what they would prey on that's invasive. I mean, I'm sure that they do prey occasionally on certain invasive species. I don't think it's it hasn't been documented that they are helping to control any particular invasive species, just because they are such generalists. So yeah, it depends.
Okay, all right. And then Laura was wondering, and maybe this has to do with using natural means to try to keep them away from your house or other things. Is there any, let's see, is there any natural plant that may repel them, is the question.
Another good question. Not that I'm aware of. I have not seen any research to suggest that.
Yeah, it's interesting, since we don't protect them and we don't, spend a lot of money researching them. Some of these questions, we need somebody to do the research.
I know. Yeah. If you guys know of any students interested in.
So Rebecca, back when you were talking about keeping your pets and such away from coyotes, I was wondering about cats on the porch. Are they still at risk?
So if it's a screened in porch, I would say no. I suppose a coyote might, catch a glimpse of one and know that they're there, but I don't know that they'd go through the effort to like break through the screen to get it. They're gonna, take, again, the path of least resistance and probably find prey elsewhere. So I would say as long as it's a screened in porch, that would be fine.
Okay. Such important information, and I'm really happy how engaged the audience is in all of this and trying to learn more and understand more about coyotes. It was really cool because some of the that takes us through the questions, but we had some really interesting comments at the beginning when you were introducing the program and kind of querying everybody on their experience seeing coyotes in their particular area. And as a matter of fact, Deborah offered that she hears coyotes yowling when emergency vehicles are going by with their sirens, and was wondering if anybody else had had that experience.
That's awesome. I have heard that from other people. I don't know how common it is, and I could see how it might sound similar. I mean, the sound is, if you've ever heard a coyote calling, I could see from a distance that would sound similar, the sirens and the coyote calls. But
yeah,
and that would, again, another interesting thing to study, like how urban sounds are impacting coyote behaviors.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, let's see. Yeah, Bill just offered, we have heard them at Kissimmee State Park, and I'm sure that they're at other parks. Yep, they're all over. Judy apparently has trail cameras too and tracks them on her trail camera. How cool is that?
That's awesome.
And a bunch of people in the audience have seen them. In fact, Jake, I don't know where Jake lives, but he offered that he just saw 3 last night. So Jake's,
wow, that's
Jake's the lucky
awesome.
owner. Yeah. So I think that just about covers it. I hope I got to everybody's questions, and we gave Lara a chance to cover what you were interested in. Again, this program is being recorded, so come back, check out our YouTube channel, and get any additional information that you might have missed the first time, or encourage other people that were not able to make today's presentation to come find us. And I want to give a generous thanks once again to Lara Milligan. It's a real treat to have you with us this morning, Lara, on such an important subject with such great information. Really interesting presentation, and we're really excited to have you guys present for us throughout the rest of the year. So thank you so much, Lara, and thank you to the audience and for all of your participation, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.